And I started crying for like 3 seconds. It's like, ah, ah. And then I was like, no. And I just went like that. And then she looked at me and that freaked her out. Right? She was like, what just happened? And then I said, like in a very calm voice, what do you mean what just happened? Which just freaked her out even more. Because I was like, I'm not going to lose control. I'm not going to, you hurt me? No, I'm not going to cry. Like, I'm tougher than that. Like, that's not going to hurt me. And I think a lot of us have fallen into the mistake of saying it doesn't work because I didn't get what I wanted. And that's something I've been learning. It's like, God actually does want to give me what I want. I'm the one that doesn't know what I really want. And then there's an element of trust of like, if I don't get what I think, what I want, God, I'm going to trust you. And I have not found a more beautiful way to live. I have not found a more satisfying way that can take me through the pain and disappointments, through like real hard stuff, than following Jesus.
Hey guys, welcome back to the pod. We have a very lovely person and friend guesting on our podcast today. His name is Joe O. I kind of had to do that intentional pause for his first name and last name, but he is such an awesome guy. He's a fiery guy. He's been through a lot, so we're excited to dive deep into here with the hope of sharing some of his experiences to bless all of you. So Joe is a coach, he's a math teacher, but he's so much more than that. For people who don't know you, can you share a bit about what's led you to where you are now? Maybe some significant moments in your life, highs and lows that have led you to where you are?
My main day job is, I always tell people I work with the most dangerous population in Oakland, middle school students. I work with them, teaching them their favorite subject, math. And the reason why I started teaching math was I started off teaching all subjects. And history was actually my favorite subject to teach. But I heard that algebra was the gatekeeper. If students graduated from algebra, it was more likely that they would finish high school. And so I decided, okay, I'll teach math. And I noticed that's been a trend in my life of feeling that kind of responsibility. And some people talk about it being like a caretaker. I'm also the oldest of 6. That also formed my identity. I totally always expect to get the front seat. Like, doesn't matter, right? I'm like, front seat shotgun, that's mine. The prize in the cereal box, that's mine, right? It's my birthright as being the firstborn, but also a sense of responsibility for other people, caring for other people. And I think that makes sense in the profession I'm doing right now as a teacher and as a coach. So that's a little bit of who I am.
Yeah, and then on the faith side, you're speaking at churches, and you've been in ministry for a long time now, just leading and shepherding other people as well. And so, can you talk a bit about how you came to Christ and what has that looked like in particular, like fusing that in what you do at the school too?
Well, my father's a pastor, came to this country 40 years ago, and the story that he tells me is that he was walking around Seoul and he heard a voice, audible voice, tell him that he was going to come to America. And he had no way of coming, didn't even have a passport, because when the war happened in Korea, his family was from, kids always ask me, are you from the North or the South? I'm like, time out. I was born in San Francisco. Okay.
Love a question.
It's like, they're like, can we trust you? I'm like, you can trust me. But my father was what I say, Northern Korea, not North Korea, Northern, because it was just Korea. But they fled because they didn't want to live under the communist rule. And then so they fled to the South, settled in Seoul. My mom was from Seoul. But he heard a voice telling him that he's going to come to America one day. Happened to walk by a church service. He didn't know what was going on. He walked in there and people were worshiping and praising and singing. And he just kind of got swept up in it. And he said, for the first time in my life, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace. And he was 9 or 10 when the Korean War happened. They're running, thousands are running for their lives, and they're seeing, death around them. So there was that moment of peace, and he like really connected with God there. Even the story of how he came. It's okay if I kind of share the story of how he came to this country.
Yeah.
So he didn't have a passport. His English is not great. My Korean is not great. So we think we're communicating. So I'm going to tell you what I think he's been saying to me is he didn't have a passport. And there were stories, something about like he would even have to run and hide because there was a lot of suspicion that there were spies. And there actually have been proven to be North Korean spies that infiltrated all levels of, the Korean government. And so back then, especially, there was a lot of paranoia. So there are times where he'd have to run and hide because they would do searches and raids. And, his friend came to him and said, hey, you've always had this dream to go to America because this voice told you you're going to America. So you need a passport. Let's go get your passport. And he's like, I've tried. They always like refuse. I can never make it past the interviews. So they said, no, let's just go. His friend kept badgering him to go. So he said, let's go. So they walk, and there's a gate, the entrance to the place where you get your passport. And there's usually stationed by guards, and they're usually turned away, but no one's there. And so my father's friend says, let's keep going. So they walk in, they get to another checkpoint, but no one's there. And they've never been this far before. And so they keep going, and they make it to the building where you get your passports. They walk inside the building. It's completely empty. And there's just a bell on the counter. So they go up and they ding, hit the bell. And this person comes scurrying from the back room to the counter, bows to them and says, how can I help you? And my friend's dad says, not my friend's dad, my dad's friend says, he needs a passport. And he goes, right away, sir. Stamps it, does all the stuff, hands it to him, says, is there anything else? And they were like, no, thank you. They turn around and walk out. The person who worked there's assumption is like anyone that walks in here is connected, is someone of high value, needs to be served right away. And so that's how he got his passport. Wow. And then he was part of a church in Korea, and they were deciding, and at that time it was considered like the largest church, Yoido, a full gospel in the world. And they were, he was serving there as a children's pastor, and they wanted to find someone to send to San Francisco to plant a church in the 80s. A lot of Koreans were immigrating to the United States. They were deciding who to send. And this woman that was, part of the church nominated my father to go. And so that's how we ended up in San Francisco. And that's why I speak English better than Korean. Yeah. And I don't even remember the original point or the original question. But
that's okay. That's an amazing testimony. It's like, it reminds me of Paul, like escaping prison. There's like, no, where are the guards? Like there should be all these precautions and levels to pass through. It's just so easy how it all happens. So, wow, God opened the door.
But totally changed the trajectory of my life, my family's life, my brothers and sisters. Yeah, just that. Hearing that voice, and then the passport and the opportunity to come here, I would have had a completely different life.
Yeah, I often think about generational inheritances, not financial inheritance, although that is part of it, but also generational inheritance and generational curses as well. With that in mind, I'm curious, like how does your dad's impact look on you right now?
All right, you're going. I'm Asian American, bro. You can't talk about dads and things like that without any warning.
Touchy subjects.
Just so people know, I'm gonna pull back the curtain a little bit. They do send like, hey, these are questions we might ask. This question was not on that list. Okay, so any future guests, just know they're gonna go there. They're gonna sense a sensitive area, and
we're gonna go 180.
They're gonna go in. It was hard because now I realize, I was like, wow, Koreans, we're known for, you can say being passionate. Other people would say angry, but I'm just realizing like, hey, our parents grew up in a war. Like they saw people die around them. They had to, flee for their lives. And didn't know I was going to talk so much about my dad, but he even told me a story of my grandfather was a doctor. I never met him. He died when my father was 10. So around the wartime, he passed away, but they were very well off because he was a doctor. And then they had to run for their lives. So a lot of people would like sell their possessions. They purchased gold. They had like he put his hand like this. So I'm imagining like that's how much gold they had, right? Wrapped it up. They were even rich enough to hire someone to carry the gold for them. They didn't tell the guy. They didn't tell the guy it was gold. I mean, who, when you're running for your life, hires someone to carry your stuff, right? So they were well loaded. Off. They were loaded. So he grew up like a prince, right? That's what I say. But then this war happens, totally disrupts their life. They're fleeing the north. They have someone that's carrying basically what they consider, my grandfather considers their future. Like this is how we're going to start over, right? And reestablish ourselves. Because there's thousands of people fleeing, they get separated from this guy. And my grandfather's so distraught. He's saying, now I have nothing, is what he's believing, is my guess. My father told me this, which means his parents told him. His grandfather, since he was a doctor, had access to medicines, poisons. And the plan was he was going to give it to his two sons, my father and his older brother, his wife, and then himself, because he was saying there's no hope. He was in so much despair.
Wow.
And as he was about to deliver the poison to his children, my dad says they see the guy that they hired with all the gold in the bag just walking up the road. And they said, hey, over here. And he sees them. He's like, oh, I lost you guys. And this guy, my dad says, he was such an honest guy. He never opened it, never looked inside, just kept walking to where he said they would go, and they ran into each other. And because of that, my father was alive long enough to have me, right? Another moment where it could have all ended. I'd never be here on this podcast. So my father experienced a lot. My mother too, just in that war. And I'd never really thought about it. They would tell me stories here and there, and just understanding like, oh, actually a lot of our parents from that generation traumatized through a war. Now we're always talking about therapy and mental health. I'm like, they didn't have any of that, right? And so they just dealt with it the best they could, still carrying a lot of trauma, a lot of them still never having really talked about it. And so that's how we grew up. And so my father had a huge impact on my life and still does. It wasn't always a positive impact, and since I think he kind of threw himself into his work, which people often do. And so for him, it was being a pastor. And so he was at church a lot. Didn't really see him at home as much as we did at church. And so there was kind of an absence there of like, I know who you are. I have a father, but I don't really know him. He doesn't really know me, but he provides for us. I could always hear him praying when he was home. So that's one thing I always have. And, I do remember one time when I was 5, we were at Chuck E. Cheese and they had the animatronics, and they freaked me out. I was like, that's not natural. That is not natural, right? Like this 7-foot lion playing electric guitar. I was like, this is not natural. This is some kind of like abomination. So I was 5 years old. I was freaked out. I would not go into the room, and everyone else would go in. And so I went, and I remember I went on this airplane ride that, just like a little circle. It felt safe, right? So I'm just sitting on there. And my dad came over, and the way Koreans pray, they pray loud and aggressively. And so he just took his hands and he clamped it around my head, and he started praying in Korean. And
I can totally imagine that.
And shaking my head, and I'm like I'm still on the ride. I can only imagine now like what all the other like white families were thinking about. It's like, what is going on here? He must be from North Korea, right? But as he prayed for me, I knew he was praying for me to like be brave, and like I physically felt the fear leave my body. And after that plane ride, I got out and I walked in, and I sat, in the front and watched the animatronics, and all that, and I felt no fear. So that's a memory I had recently that I shared with my dad. Like I called him last week and I said, hey, I just want to tell you, like, I remember that like when I was 5 and I was scared, like you prayed for me, and I actually felt the fear leave my body. And I just wanted to share it. He didn't remember it.
Does it all the time.
Yeah, he doesn't remember it. But for me, I was like, I just want to say thank you. And I just want to, and I hope you still pray for me, because I feel like your prayers are powerful.
That's so beautiful. As you're talking, I was reminded of how it's so easy for us to think of God's faithfulness in the context of our own lives and what we've been through personally, but it really is a generational thing. It's when we look at our parents and their parents and, generations, just all the miracles that had to happen for us to be here and be alive and to also experience God's goodness. So thank you for sharing that, because it's just so beautiful thinking like all the miraculous ways God has shown up for your grandparents and then your parents and now for you, and then also through their prayers, their faith, and how much that really, really impacts, our future generations as well. Like not just for one generation, but it's like future ones.
So before this recording, we talked a little bit about anxiety, and I know a lot of people struggle with anxiety. So I'm wondering if you can pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about some of the anxiety that you're facing, and maybe if you're comfortable talking about the panic attacks and how even integrity ties into all of that.
I mean, you just put it all out there, Alex. So like, if you're comfortable talking, you already mentioned it. So why not? We did talk about it before a little bit. I remember the first time a close friend of mine shared with me that they were having panic attacks. And I'd heard that phrase before. And so I was in my early 20s and he was in his early 30s. We developed a friendship. We're pretty close. And I remember seeing that he was in distress. And so as a friend, I'm like, I want to support you. I can see you're in distress and pain. So like I'm taking this as seriously as I can. And at the same time, I had no idea what he's talking about, because I'm like, I think for what I know of panic attacks is that it's all in your head. It's all made up, but nothing's really happening to you. And so you just need to calm down. And he was like, I went to my doctor because I was like, I'm having a heart attack. I'm having a heart attack. And my doctor was like, you're not. It's a panic attack. And so in my mind, it only reinforced the, oh, see, it's all imagined. And if you just stop believing this imaginary thing, you'll be fine. But still compassionate, just not understanding. And fast forward 10 years later, early in my 30s, I had my first what I know now as a panic attack. I just didn't know. I just started with a feeling, something's wrong. I feel really off. It's this
Mm,
weird feeling. And then after a minute or two or three being like, this feeling's not going away. It's
mm,
weird. And from that, it just kind of spiraled, and then you start getting anxious. My
mm,
wife had grown up experiencing like panic attacks and anxiety and had to work a lot to get through it. So she knew what it was.
mm,
And so she was like, call the advice nurse, because she wanted them to walk me through like, it's not a heart attack and all this stuff. And I was getting frustrated with the nurse, like, no, something's wrong. Something's wrong. That was my first taste of it. And like, it was like it just didn't leave. And I don't even feel like I can still articulately describe it, but it was like, it's like if you hopped in the shower, but it would just turn really hot, then really cold, or really, basically like you don't have control. Like you just can't turn it off. Like it
mm,
just turns on whenever it wants, and it's scalding hot. And then sometimes it's freezing cold. Like it's this feeling of just like it's inescapable. It just happens to you is what it feels like. And that lasted, I remember, for about 4, 5 weeks. It was like a daily thing. I went to work the next day teaching kids in my class, and I had a earpiece in. I was playing worship music. I played it all day, just on repeat. And the song that I remember I was playing was "Goodness of God," or it's one of those Bethel songs. Right? It's like I just played it on repeat for hours because I didn't know how to not freak out. And
mm,
I was ill equipped to deal with it. After about 4 or 5 weeks, it eventually lifted, but then it would come back now and then.
mm,
But I would say around December, it came back really strong. Like I
mm,
was lying in bed. It was after Christmas, and I just jumped up and I was like, I can't breathe. I feel panicked, and my wife was there, and so she kind of like helped me to like breathe, settle down. It happened a couple times. We went to SeaWorld, and then I was like, I'm so dizzy. I just sat down. I was like, I can't walk right now. It's like, I might need to call an ambulance. That was like a week later. And this would just keep happening every couple weeks. But even then, I didn't connect like, oh, I'm having high anxiety. These are panic attacks. It was like, I'm just feeling off. A couple hours later, I feel better. I'm good. I'll
mm,
keep moving. And then about maybe a month ago, it just hit a point where it was like what happened like 10 years ago, where it was like from the moment I waked up till I went to sleep, it felt like this continual dread, panic. Like I was in a work meeting, and I was like, I just need to make it to the end of this meeting. And there were times where like I would look at people who were mentally ill or mentally unstable and be like, how do you go crazy? I don't understand that. How can you end up
mm,
like that? Maybe you just do a lot of drugs. And I have not done a lot of drugs. I have not even done little drugs. I've done no drugs, right? But in those moments, I was like, oh, I could see how someone could go
Mm.
insane. Like your sanity
mm,
feels
Yeah.
so tenuous, and like, oh, that person's acting crazy. But I could see how they would get there. If
mm,
I didn't hold it together right now, I would just be flipping out. So that was really scary for me to feel that, in a sense, unstable. And
mm,
like, because like I said, I'm the oldest of six. I've always been like the responsibility of feeling like I care for other people. I take care of them. Like, I'm okay. I'm going to take care of you. And then feeling like if I can't take care of myself, I don't know what to do. And just even that meeting, like with there 10 minutes left, and I went up to my principal and I was like, hey, I don't feel well. I need to leave right now. And he was just like, go. And then I walked out to the car and I was like, Aaron, can you, because we both worked at the same school. I was like, hey, can you drive me home right now? As soon as we got in the car, I just started hyperventilating, which is not something I would do. I feel other symptoms. I was just like, whew, whew. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. And then I just started crying, and I didn't know why. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm definitely crazy. I was like, I'm crying. And I don't know why. I think this is what crazy people do. And I was just crying. But one thing I was understanding was like, I'm not going to stifle this. The first time I had a panic attack, I've already said my wife is amazing. So remember that, people. Okay. But the night before, we were having an argument, and if you're married, or if you've had these kind of arguments when you're having an argument, but you're both in bed, those are the worst, right? It's like, because you're trying to sleep, but then you're like, you feel this obligation to resolve. And it was like
Mm.
maybe over an
Yeah.
hour of that. And then, you also come to know like people have their own fears and their own wounds. And a lot of times when you're married, not only do you bring out the best, but you also bring out the worst. But that's an opportunity for healing. But if you're not aware of that and working on that, you just bring out the best and the worst, and it just feels up and down. And I triggered one of her fears, and then she just said to me like, "You don't really care," and that
Mm.
just cut me so deep. And I
Wow.
was like, "How could you say that I don't care?" That's just what I was thinking. But what happened was I just started crying, and she'd never really seen me cry like that. Like, I'll cry during a sad movie, but not like cry because you said something that hurt my feelings. And I started crying for like 3 seconds. It's like, and then I was like, no. And I just went like that. And then she looked at me and that freaked her out, right? She was like, what just happened? I was like, and then I said like in a very calm voice, what do you mean what just happened? Which just freaked her out even more. Because I was like, I'm not going to lose control. You hurt me? No, I'm not going to cry. Like, I'm tougher than that. Like, that's not going to hurt me. And I just refused to acknowledge that it had hurt me. And it scared her so much. And then I think we just went to bed because I don't remember what happened. But the next day, right, is when I had like this feeling of something's not right, something's wrong. And then this dread just come upon me. And later on, Aaron was like, hey, I think this is what's happening. Your body's trying to tell you something's not right, but you shut it down. And like when we were arguing, like you were crying for like 2-3 seconds, and then you just flipped it off. And you said no. But your body knows something's wrong, right? Your emotions, your subconscious, your unconscious, like everything is telling you there's something here. And you're like, no, it's not. So then it's almost like your body's like, okay, I've got to turn the alarm up to a 4, up to a 7, up to a 10. Like, I need to get your attention. That made sense to me of like, okay, I think that's what's happening. And I think I had a pattern of that. My parents went through a war. I didn't go through a war, but I went through my own struggles. But one thing I learned from them is like, just get through it. Like, just get through it. Until my body told me like, and my mind were just like, and my nervous system was just like, no, like you've got to deal with it. So I think the biggest gift I've received right now is not avoiding things.
Do you know where all this anxiety and panic attacks came from?
My wife. No, I'm kidding. No, absolutely not. She's been, I even told her today, like I tell her like, I don't know how I would have made it without you. Like, I just appreciate you so much. Where it's coming from, I think some of it came from like generational trauma, right? Like the things that happened to my parents and the things that, they passed on to me through their wounds and their parenting. Some of the coping skills of like, just get through it. Just get through it. Like my mom she's also an amazing woman. There was this one conference that she went to with my sister. My sister called me. She's like, Joe, you're not going to believe what happened. You're not going to believe what mom did. I'm so embarrassed. And I was like, okay, my mom, she does embarrassing things. Okay. What'd she do? She's like, we're at this Korean conference, church service, and the pastor's up there and he's taking everyone through repentance, like, confessing of sins, which in Catholics still have like confession, but like Protestant churches don't really confess, right? You confess pride. That's it, right? Like, or maybe unforgiveness. I don't forgive you, right? Or I'm too proud because I'm so gifted. But you don't confess anything else. And so he was like naming areas of brokenness, or the word we would use would be sin, right? And he's calling things out. And maybe it was like bitterness, pride, unforgiveness, jealousy. And then my sister told me, and then the pastor said, if you are struggling with pornography, stand up. And I was like, no. And she's like, she stood up, Joe. There were hundreds of people there and no one else stood, right? And she was like, and there were these boys in front of us and they were poking each other, turn around, pointing at her. And when I heard that, I got so angry. I was like, did you take a picture? In my mind, I was like, I'm going to find them, right? And she's like, and people were like pointing at her and laughing. And I know my mom, when she gets in these, like, I don't give a, like kind of mode, she stands like this. Like she will literally stand like this, like puff her chest out. And that's how she was standing. I felt so much embarrassment at that moment that the next time I talked to my mom, I said, Mom, please, if you want to embarrass yourself, that's one thing, but stop embarrassing your family, right? Like, it's like, the Asian kind of thing, right? And, but I asked her, I was like, Mom, do you know what pornography is? Maybe you thought he said photography, right? And you're like, I can't stop taking pictures. Right? Or like, I was like, do you know what it is? And then she was like, yes, I know what it is. I was like, okay, you know what it is. And then I was too scared to ask her, like, do you struggle with this? She just told me, she's like, I don't struggle with it, but I knew people struggled with it and no one was standing.
Wow.
I could tell they were too ashamed. So I wanted to stand to show them, like, you don't need to be ashamed. Like, look at me. I'm not ashamed. You don't need to be ashamed. And, like, that's who she is, she's embarrassing and she's amazing. That's the kind of woman she is. When I think about the things she's gone through in her life to survive, she also had to not only be courageous for other people, but I don't know if I saw her always being courageous for herself.
Hmm.
She would stand up for other people. I never really saw her standing up for herself. And so there were just lots of, we get the generational, not just people say generational curses, but there's also generational blessings, right? There's strengths and weaknesses, and it all gets passed down to us. And one of the ways she coped, though, was like to disassociate, to just kind of like
Yeah.
ignore, right? And just focus on the best and positive things in life, which was a great strength and a great coping skill, but it also has drawbacks, like not dealing with reality all the time. And so I think I learned part of that from her and my dad too, of like avoid. If things are really unpleasant, like get past it, get through it, but don't really deal with it, avoid. And I think that pattern led to the place where like my nervous system, my subconscious basically was at a point where it's like, can't do this anymore. Like, got to deal with some things. And a couple years ago, I think I went through a moment where I was like, there's only so much like going to church that will transform you. And church is important. Like Bible says, don't forsake the gathering. I learned a lot from church. Sunday school, one of the most transformative times of my life. College, all of a sudden now I'm college and I'm like, oh, tell me more than just the Bible stories. Like, oh, you're telling me the etymology, the Hebrew is this and the Greek is this. And I'm like, wow, I've never heard this before. This is amazing. This is so rich. This is like, real food. And the Bible stories were just milk. And that's just all my judgment, right? Not that anyone else listening to this would ever think that, but that's how I was thinking. I'm going where I'm getting real food, and there's something that can grow, but there's only so much that knowledge can grow you. And I think we were talking earlier, like that's like, and maybe I mean, there's even only so much that reading the Bible can transform you. And there are plenty of people that read the Bible and study the Bible that are not transformed by it. Some of them call themselves Christians and some of them are not Christians. And I'm trying to say that without judgment. I reached a point in my life where I'd heard so many sermons and messages, been to so many conferences, etc. It's very rare that I hear something new per se, but even when I hear something new, it doesn't transform me. Like whatever was going to transform me by being new knowledge, I've already reached that level. And I think the next step for me in how God is shaping me and transforming me is, I think it's through suffering. And one of the times where I felt the most suffering in my life, and that, I've suffered in my life. Like, I think we all have, right? And this is not a feel sorry for me. Like, everyone suffered. Like, if you hear their story. But well, my wife and I, we have two beautiful daughters. We got pregnant with our third. And every time we got pregnant, it was like, we had sex and then she's pregnant. So I'm like, and my parents have 6 kids, right? And so I'm like, yeah, like I don't understand this whole infertility thing. Like I just haven't experienced it. And so, we had 2 girls and then we find out the sex of the baby's male. So I was like, oh, we're going to have a boy, 2 girls and a boy. Great. I wonder what we would look like as a male, as a boy. Right? I know what we look like as girls. Beautiful. What do we look like? Anyway. And then I just got a phone call from my wife just saying, hey, can you just come home? And this was like near the end of work. And we were working at the same school back then too. So I was like, okay, I'm a little worried and concerned just because you're saying like, come home right away. I come home, walking through the apartment. She's not there. Then I hear her at the door. I walk up like, hey, what's going on? And the first thing she says is, there's no heartbeat. And it was like almost at the end of the second trimester. So around 5.5 to 6 months. And around then it's like really rare for a miscarriage to happen. And we were just in our entryway and I just held her and we just cried. And then I was like, okay, we're going to pray. So we just prayed to God, like, bring the heartbeat back, heal my son. I read the story of Jairus' daughter, where he asked Jesus, heal my daughter. And he keeps getting interrupted, and there's a woman there who like reaches and touches his cloak, right? I think this is the same story. If it's not, go ahead. You can comment to Alex and Grace. And then where Jesus says, I felt the power flow out of me. And I can imagine just Jairus just being like, we got to go. Like, we've got to go. Like, my daughter needs you. And eventually they get to the daughter and he tells her, oh, get up. And she gets up. And I would just read that story over and over again. And my youngest daughter, maybe she was around 5 at the time. And I kind of wanted to not traumatize her, but invite her into the process of praying for healing. I was like, hey, I want you to be part of this. And so I in the children's version story, I would read the children's version to her. And we kind of explained to her, like, hey, the doctors say there's no heartbeat, but we're praying. And the first time we told her, she just cried, like this wail just came out of her. And she just kept saying, like, I want Sissy. And, it wasn't a sister, it was a brother, but she just kept saying, I want Sissy. I want Sissy. But I was like, man, that's, even at 5, you're feeling exactly what we're feeling. So we got our whole church to pray with us. And my mind was doing funny things where it was like, God, you're God. You can do this. Like, you're God. Like, nothing's impossible for you. And then 2 minutes later, I'll be thinking like, okay, so how do I let everyone know that we're going to move forward with the memorial service? And I'd be like, no. Got to get back to faith. Got to get back to faith. One thing I learned was like to not be afraid to ask for what I really wanted, and so I was just like, God, I'm just asking you. I know you can say no, but I'm asking you for healing. I'm asking for a miracle. We went to the hospital, and then the doctors, and here's the thing about a hospital. Everything in a hospital is like, feels so certain and final. Like I felt it like sucking my faith out, like leave your faith at the door. And like,
Wow.
we were in the room and I said, hey, I don't know why I said this, but I was like, we believe in science. I was like, we believe in science. E equals MC squared, right? But science and medicine can't help our child. So we've been praying. Only God can help our child. Can you check one more time before the procedure? See if there's a heartbeat. And they were like, we can. And, but it's very like clinical. And they place the device on Aaron, and they're moving it around. And I just see no movement. And they're like, they wait like, out of respect, I guess, just like, 30, 40 seconds. And they're like, I'm so sorry, but there's nothing there. There's no heartbeat. And I accepted it. And I held on to that guilt for a little bit of I should have fought more in that moment. I should have placed my hand on her stomach and said, like, in Jesus' name, but I just accepted it. And I carried that guilt for a little bit. And then I had a friend who just, was praying for me and came to visit us afterwards. And one of the first things she said was like, you fought so hard. And we named him Kyle because Kyle is it's a Hebrew word which means power of God. Because we were like, hey, this miracle is gonna show the power of God. And she just said, you fought so hard for him. And I just cried because I was like, I didn't. Not as hard as I could have. But she was like, no, you fought. You trusted. You put your faith in God. And you fought for him. And all my children have a middle name. My middle name is my Korean name. And my children, it's Olivia Joy and Junia Grace. And so Olivia, I just asked her like, hey, Kyle, we're going to have his memorial service. In the program, I just wanted to put like a full name. So I just asked her like, can you think of a middle name for Kyle? She was like 5 and she was just in the back seat. And she's like, I got it. And I was like, what is it? And she said, kindness.
Oh. Wow.
And, and I felt like that's so fitting because I believe God is powerful and he shows his power in his kindness. That was a time that we went through where you want something, you watch it die, you're praying that it comes back. And at least on this side, people say this side of heaven or eternity, it's not going to happen. And accepting that it's gone for now. I think everyone's experienced something like that, whether it's a dream or a relationship or a person, watching that thing die, right? Or community. There's a lot of things that we lose that we don't get back the way we want when we want, at least not now. And that was very forming for me, though, more than any message or Bible study or conference I've been to. It's just walking through that and the people that walk through us with it. And when you face something like that, it can be so tempting to just want to turn away and be like, I don't want to feel anything. You know, like, I just don't want to feel. There were times where I was like, I just don't want to feel this sadness anymore. I just don't. But one thing this current bout with the anxiety and panic attacks has taught me is like, I'm not going to avoid it. Like, whatever grief is there, I won't avoid it. Whatever sadness is there, I'm not going to avoid it. There are even times this past couple of weeks where, you know, I was just sad. I didn't know why. You know, I think that's what they call melancholy, when you're sad, but there's not like a specific reason you can tie it to. And I was like, before I would just try to distract myself. Hey, go for a run, go work out, call a friend, watch YouTube, right? Work. That's a good one. Let me work. Whatever it is to avoid that uncomfortable feeling. But I just sat there, I accepted it, acknowledged that right now I'm feeling sad. I don't like this feeling. It's uncomfortable. I don't know why I'm sad. I'm going to invite God into it. It's okay that I'm sad. A couple days later, I was like, ugh, this is more embarrassing to admit than that I feel sad for some reason. I feel lonely. And I was like, Aaron, I know people say they like me and I have friends, but I just feel lonely right now. I don't feel like there's anyone I could really call or hang out with. And some of it's like, we're all busy. We all got families. We all got kids. We live in different parts of the world now. Like, we can't just hang out, right? I feel lonely. But instead of covering that up and avoiding it or eating a pizza, it's like, I'm lonely. I have great relationships around me, loving family, but I still feel lonely. That's okay. God, I'm just inviting you to this like uncomfortable feeling that I want to avoid. I've just been doing more of that. And that has also just led me to being more grateful, more present. You know, there's still times I just turn to coping, right? And then I'm like, okay, wait, I'm just coping right now. I'm trying to avoid something unpleasant, uncomfortable, which is my tendency. Again, I don't even know what the question was that you asked.
It's okay. It's beautiful. I think you touched on so many different things. Thank you also for being just so real and just sharing, you know, the real pain of going through that. And I think a lot of people who have experienced, you know, miscarriage or infertility or just really hard tragedy and grief, like it can be really lonely, especially when no one else really talks about it. So I can already like see how so many people will be ministered just hearing how you walk through it, how hard it was, even as someone who grew up in the church and whose father was a pastor, and you know God, you are a Christian, and but it's still hard. And I think oftentimes even as Christians, like we can feel bad for feeling bad, right? Like we're trying to suppress, just like you said, we as a coping mechanism, maybe because we also saw modeled in our families, like we don't know how to just sit with those real emotions and bring it to God. And I love that, you know, you talked about how, yeah, suffering is actually a huge way that God uses. Like, actually, we were just talking about this last night with our small group. Like, the Bible literally says, rejoice in the trials, like, rejoice in the suffering, because it actually produces endurance and perseverance and hope and character and all these things. And it's so easy for us to read it and be like, oh, that's nice, like, know it in our heads. But where that really comes to be tested, like, how do we actually embrace that if we're not going through trials, if we're not going through suffering, and learning to practice that in our very real everyday lives? So I wanted to kind of go back, because I feel like so much of this, we're seeing the connections, right, with like, you know, your family not really knowing how to care for themselves and their own emotions, and then that's what we learn, you know, in this generation. It's so awesome that, you know, you're trying to kind of invite your children now into the messiness of the process rather than just shield them from it. And I'm curious, like, how do you kind of navigate, especially with the more recent, I guess, more anxiety and the bouts of the panic attacks, which a lot of people also experience but don't really know how to navigate through the lens of faith, right? Because it's just this tension of like, you want to have faith, you want to believe in the power of God, and that he's with you, that he's good, you know, all these things that you read in scripture that are true, while holding your very real pain and suffering and unfulfilled dreams, you know, broken dreams. And yeah, can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, how are you learning to navigate that tension better, and also teaching now your kids, you know, how to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think like when I look at prayer, earlier on, I think I felt like it was like arm wrestling with God, where God can beat me because he's stronger and he's God. But the secret is you can tire him out, right? He'll just get so tired. He'll be like, okay, fine, I'll give it to you. Here you go. That was kind of my view. So like you just be persistent and pray and pray and pray, and eventually God will tire out, give it to you. So it's very much about the outcome. Did you get what you were praying for? Did you get what you wanted? But when it comes to prayer, or when it comes to like, there are things that I still want, absolutely. But even with like the situation with Kyle, the outcome that I wanted was miraculous heartbeat. Here he is. Let me bring him on right now. And he hops my lap. I said, here's Kyle. His name means power of God. And the kindness that God has shown us. That's the outcome I wanted. But in my walk with God, and I could have chosen to be like, you know what? F this, I'm out. But it's not about the outcome. And ultimately, I believe there is an outcome one day where God makes all things right. He says he'll dry every tear from our eyes, right? Make everything right. I believe in that ultimate outcome. But while I'm here, it's not about getting the outcome that I want. I'm more committed to like, who is God calling me to be? And no matter what I go through, no matter the outcome, it's shaping me into that person. A person who has hope, even though they don't have reason to be hopeful. Like, why are you still hopeful? God didn't answer your prayer. He said no. Why are you still hopeful? Why are you still loving? Why are you still generous? Why are you still forgiving? Why are you still courageous? I'm committed to being who he's called me to be. And that's what guides me through these when I don't get the outcome that I want. And I think a lot of us have fallen into the mistake of saying it doesn't work because I didn't get what I wanted. And that's something I've been learning. It's like God actually does want to give me what I want. I'm the one that doesn't know what I really want. And then there's an element of trust of like, if I don't get what I think, what I want, God, I'm going to trust you. And I have not found a more beautiful way to live than to follow Jesus. I have not found a more satisfying way that can take me through the pain and disappointments, through like real hard stuff, than following Jesus. When sin was put on his body, like it's not just like bad things. It's like all of our brokenness. And some people say, like, as I studied, and if your listeners are Christian, they might have already been exposed to this. Like, but I was just like reflecting on it, like he experienced in his body. So like part of the thing is, well, like when I was in anxiety or panic, well, one of the things I believe is I'm all alone. No one understands. That's one of like my beliefs that pops up. And even as I'm trying to explain to Aaron, I'm like, you don't understand what's happening in my brain right now. Like no one understands. Like you think you understand, but I can't explain to you what's happening. And that made me feel so alone. But understanding like when I'm in my moment of fear and panic, like Jesus actually experienced the exact same thing in his body that I'm experiencing in mine. It's not just the sin of the world. It's like when I had things done to me, he experienced that in his body. It's not a theoretical. It's like every assault, everything. He also experienced the exact same thing in his body, and then God judged it. It wasn't just like God judged Jesus. It was like he experienced the sin of it in his body, and then God judged the sin. And so just knowing like I'm not alone, like he actually understands. And it's crazy to say, more than the miracle and like a snap of the finger healing, understanding that he actually has experienced it and understands it is what's allowing me to keep pursuing and faithfully walking after Jesus through the hard times.
Well, we definitely jumped into the deep end here. Yeah, we really just appreciate your vulnerability. And I'm sure many of our listeners can relate with different points of your story, even to different intensities. I know that there are people who are going through hard times, a lot of different circumstances, maybe different emotions that they're feeling, or maybe they don't even know what they're feeling or why they're feeling it. And so I'm wondering if you could offer an encouragement or advice. I don't even know what the word is, but for someone who's suffering, going through some trials right now, what would you say to that person?
Oh man. For me, it's just I just have a prayer for them, because there's things I could say, but I just pray that they would create space to just sit there and to invite God and to just wait. And sometimes it feels like he's not there, but to just wait. And I know he's there because I've gone through it. But if you're in the middle of it, like, you can't feel God. And I just want to say that's okay. Like, you can't feel him. He feels far. He feels gone. And I just want to say, like, that's okay. But to just sit there and to just invite God. There will come a time when you have gone through it and you look back and then you can connect dots and see, like, oh, God was there. But I just want to say, if they're in the middle of that period and they're just feeling like, I can't feel God, he's not here, not to take that as the sign that it's true that he's not there. That's normal. I completely understand that. It doesn't mean like you've done something wrong or you're far from God. It's just what people would call, like Christians would call for thousands of years, the dark night of the soul, right? Like, that's part of the journey that they don't tell us in American Christianity, right? Like, hey, if you keep going, this is going to happen. They don't tell us that part. So it's a natural part of the spiritual formation. But there's a part where you get through it where there's just a deeper hope, a deeper joy, a deeper peace that can't be shaken by stock market or crypto, or like you got laid off. You're just more at peace, you know? And there's a quote that I actually posted on Twitter like 15 years ago, because this is when I got into Twitter and I was like, ooh, how do I be deep? Let me find deep quotes and post them, right? And so
I would do that too.
yeah, right. Like, that's it. And then one quote was something like, beautiful young people are works of accident. Beautiful old people are works of art. And then I would add and beautiful believers are works of God. And God is working in us, all of us, no matter what part of the journey we're on. And I'm just, as I get older, just more and more surrendered. You know, I still got issues that I'm going through, but I'm such a different father and husband I am today than I was 5 years ago, than I was 10 years ago. And so I'll just encourage you, like, don't stop following after him. Like, it's a narrow path. So I used to think, oh, it's a narrow path, it must be so lonely. And there are times where it feels lonely. And it's as wide as the gate or road that leads to destruction. So it's like, there's this wide gate because there's so many people on it and they're all having fun together. But the way I look at it now is like, it's a wide gate. It's a wide path. It's so wide that for miles around, you can't see anyone else. You're on that wide path that leads to destruction, but it's actually the lonelier path. The narrow path, while it feels lonely, like, we're in this single file line. And like, there are millions of people who have gone before me. There are millions of people who are going to come after me, if not billions. And just to know, like, stay on the path. Like, God will never forsake you. Even if you turn your back on him and you say, why am I still single, not married? Why don't I have kids? Why did my family have to suffer? Why is this person sick? If you choose to say, like, I'm turning away from you, God, he's never going to turn away from you. I guess that's what I would say. He'll never turn away from you.
So good. I feel like this just ministered to me so much. If it helps anyone else, that's great. But I'm just grateful that I feel like it's such a great reminder. Even thinking about this morning, how Jesus, he went through all that suffering for the very people who were scorning him, mocking him, like literally like making fun of him, saying, oh, you're king of the Jews, like prove yourself, save yourself. And just how terrible that is. And yet he's literally dying and taking all of that spiritual sin, physical suffering, emotional humiliation for those very people. And so, like, what you just said is so powerful too. Like, we can be wavering in our faithfulness to God, but he's never wavering in his faithfulness to us in terms of how much he loves us, how much he cares for us. He's compassionate towards our suffering, our pain. I hope anyone listening today, you know, whether you are going through whatever trial you're going through, whether it's at work or in a relationship or your mental health or even in faith, you know, there's permission to just be and acknowledge the very real suffering instead of stuffing it away or trying to cope. Just like Joe, you were mentioning, so many people cover it up with work and productivity and these things that seem very good, you know, but that's exactly how we leave those wounds unhealed. And more than anything, we're robbing ourselves of the opportunity to connect with God in a very deep, vulnerable way. Joe, we are just so thankful for you. Thank you for coming on and just sharing your heart, your stories. And, you know, as soon as we even talked about bringing you onto this podcast, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing, because you have just such a gift of being so real, so authentic, and just relatable, I think, in so many ways. And as well as giving other people, kind of like what you're saying about your mom, in a way, like she stood up to be like, you don't have anything to be ashamed of. I feel like you're actually doing that in a way. You're not faking it though here. But I think by you testifying your own experiences, you're giving other people permission to understand there's nothing to be ashamed of, and you can bring it, you can invite God into that process and ask God to help you, with all your messiness. If people want to learn more about you or even want to get coaching with you and learn more about that, where would be the best place for them to go?
My Twitter, I don't use it anymore. So don't go there. I just started an Instagram, renew.coach, RENU.COACH. I've got like 2 videos up there now. Yeah, don't judge me for it. I'm getting there. But if you want to connect, you can connect with me on there.
Thanks, Joe. This has been a very riveting and deep conversation that I personally feel very moved by. So thank you, Joe. Just God bless you. And we hope that you are blessed by this episode.